At our concerts, when we headline, we ask our audience to throw shit at us.
For decades, Mötley Crüe pushed 100 million records on a bulletproof myth, an unbreakable foursome living a raw, unfiltered legend. But that story doesn't hold water. Vince Neil wasn't even their first singer. When Vince walked in '92, John Corabi stepped in and cut a full record. Later, Tommy Lee bailed, leaving the drums to Randy Castillo and Samantha Maloney. That alone kills the eternal lineup fairy tale, but the rot goes deeper. Fans swallowed the dirt as gospel, yet key scenes are riddled with glaring disputes. Throw in a $137 million final tour, only for them to crawl back with new music. Mötley Crüe wasn't selling the brutal truth. They were just selling a highly profitable illusion. The real war in Mötley Crüe didn't start with a backstage brawl or a loudmouth interview. It started the second the official PR stopped matching the cold, hard facts. Public memory loves a neat package. Vince, Mick, Nicky, and Tommy. The same four guys from the start to the supposed finish line. But Vince walked in '92. In '94, the band cut a whole record with John Corabi. Tommy bailed in '99, handing the drumsticks to Randy Castillo and later Samantha Maloney. That shatters the foundation right there. But it gets worse. In 2015, they heavily hyped a final farewell tour. But come 2018, they're right back in the studio, cutting new tracks for The Dirt. And The Dirt itself? Fans ate it up as the ultimate backstage truth. But guys who were actually in the trenches, John Corabi, producer Tom Werman, and Andy McCoy, started publicly calling BS. The conflict is dead simple. Mötley Crüe hawk their story as a raw chronicle of chaos, but as the smoke clears, it looks a hell of a lot like a carefully rigged, highly profitable hustle. For years, the crowd bought the Eternal Four myth. They also bought the idea that the Mötley Crüe story was etched in stone, no fact-checking required. Once The Dirt dropped, first the book, then the movie, it became the holy grail for fans. If a story made it into the memoir or on screen, it had to be the gospel truth. Here's the catch. Over time, the guys who were actually in the room started calling foul. John Corabi, producer Tom Werman, and Andy McCoy stepped up to punch holes in some of those famous, blown-up scenes. Even the band's official dirty truth was starting to look like a cheap forgery. The second thing the public swallowed. The illusion that their dark, dangerous image was just who they naturally were. But rewind to the Shout at the Devil era in '83. Even Vince Neil admitted the whole Satanism scare was just useful noise. If it moved the needle, they milked it. Fans saw that exact same hustle with the final tour. In 2015, they sold the goodbye as the bitter end. By 2018, they were right back in the studio tracking new songs for The Dirt. At that point, the writing was on the wall. Mötley Crüe wasn't selling real chaos. They were selling a hell of a well-packaged imitation. The first real fracture didn't happen in the '90s, or post The Dirt. It cracked wide open back in '83 with Shout at the Devil. That's when Mötley Crüe stopped being just another noisy Sunset Strip garage act. They morphed into a carefully marketed threat. The record worked like a charm. Dark lyrics, a pentagram on the sleeve, wall-to-wall leather. Throw in satanic panic, outraged parents, and pearl-clutching critics. Overnight, they weren't just popular. They were a dangerous addiction. But here's where the myth gives way. Vince Neil later admitted the whole satanic rap had nothing to do with actual beliefs. It was all about eyeballs. If the uproar fueled the fire, you fanned the flames. Bottom line, one of the biggest pieces of the Crüe legend wasn't some raw, spontaneous truth. It was a cold, effective tool. And that's where the plot thickens. After Shout at the Devil hit pay dirt, chaos wasn't just a lifestyle anymore. It became a commodity. The suits at the label figured it out fast. Scandals move plastic just as well as hit singles. Tales of booze, brawls, utter mayhem, and a band constantly ticking towards 0 hour. That wasn't just fan gossip or tabloid fodder anymore. The corporate machine around them started feeding the beast. Mötley Crüe didn't get massive just by being wild. They got massive because they realized early on that wildness could be boxed up, cranked to 11, and sold off as a brand. If their very foundation was built on a stage show from day one, it leaves a damn ugly question hanging in the air. How much of their legend was actually lived, and how much was just a coldly calculated hustle? But the kill shot to the Mötley Crüe legend came later. It wasn't their reputation taking on water. It was the official truth holding that reputation up. It's one thing to admit the bad boy image was partly a branded hustle. It's a whole different ballgame when the dirt and the heroin diaries, peddled for years as brutally honest, no-filter memoirs, turn out to be a wildly unreliable chronicle. That's where the myth takes a real beating. In early 2019, Nikki Sixx caught heavy heat over a shocking story in the dirt. His defense? He admitted he didn't even remember the incident. Hell, he barely remembered giving those interviews to Neil Strauss in the first place. That alone kicks the legs right out from under the book. If your star witness can't back up his own memories, how solid is the rest of the house? And the bleeding didn't stop there. John Corabi and producer Tom Werman publicly called out Sixx's overly dramatic memories. Then Andy McCoy stepped up. He claimed that on the infamous night of Sixx's near-fatal overdose, framed in the book as a brutal beating, he wasn't kicking Sixx while he was down. He was trying to save his damn life. McCoy also ripped into how the book and film handled Razzle's death, flat out stating it completely missed what actually went down. Once the smoke clears, a dangerous question is impossible to dodge. If their dirty truth was heavily doctored, how much of the Mötley Crüe legend is actually built on facts? And how much is just well-written, highly profitable fiction? Here's where the story turns truly ugly. Because after all the cracks showed, the Crüe myth didn't bleed out. It proved tougher than the cold, hard facts. Even with a revolving door lineup, scene veterans calling out the canon, and those honest memoirs exposed as a shaky ledger, the crowd clung to the easiest lie. You see it in the music, not just the rap sheet. Take the '94 self-titled cut with John Corabi. It tanked next to their '80s gold. A new frontman, a shifted sound, label chaos, and the grunge wave hitting hard, it all took its toll. But years later, fans in the band took a second look. Tommy Lee called it a personal favorite. Mick Mars praised the heavier, technical grind. Bottom line, Mass Memory didn't latch onto what was musically superior. It locked onto whatever fit the pre-packaged Crüe brand. Then the hustle played out on an even bigger stage. In 2015, they hawked the final show as the bitter end, backed by a formal agreement to kill the touring machine. It looked like a neatly closed case, but jump to 2018. The exact same Crüe is back in the booth, tracking new cuts for the dirt. Vince Neil later spun the narrative. They only swore off the road, not the studio. A slick technicality. But the grift was familiar. Crüe sold a high-stakes, dramatic finale, then left the back door propped wide open. That's when their true, bulletproof talent steps into the light. It wasn't just raising hell. It was taking that hell, slapping a fresh coat of paint on it, and selling it right back to the crowd as a highly profitable legend. That's exactly why the Mötley Crüe saga bites harder than your run-of-the-mill rock and roll tragedy. It ain't just about the dope, the rap sheets, the car wrecks, the walkouts, and the loudmouth comebacks. It's the fact that, over the decades, they managed to spin their own total instability into a damn near perfect product. They sold the crowd one simple, shiny picture. An unbreakable foursome, honest chaos, the unfiltered truth. But the more the facts bled through, the clearer the hustle became. This legend was propped up on cherry-picked events, wild exaggerations, and highly convenient amnesia. Certain scenes were locked in as canon, others were quietly scrubbed or watered down, and every time the myth cracked, it didn't shatter. The band just patched it up and repackaged it for a bigger payout. And maybe that's their greatest, darkest trick. Mötley Crüe didn't become legends just because they lived on the razor's edge. They became legends because, for decades, they knew how to sell the crowd the exact version of the lie everyone desperately wanted to buy.